My name is Riggio, and I'm a singer-songwriter based in Brooklyn, New York. I'm from a northern New Jersey suburb about an hour outside of New York City, and my dad has always been a guitar player for practically his whole life, so I saw music as something that I always wanted to be a part of from a young age, and I was really lucky to have that encouraged. I also come from a family of people who are really good communicators, just really good with words. So even though I was terrible at math as a kid, I was always in love with writing. And I started writing songs when I was in my early teens, and I started performing at school and other community events. And then I went to Ithaca College in upstate New York, and I studied journalism there. So even though I didn't study music, this is where I really started digging in and writing, and I started a band called Olive in the Pits with my friends from the New Jersey DIY scene back at home, and we would gig together at local venues whenever I had school breaks. Growing up in middle-class suburbs is frankly an incredibly mediocre experience, which in hindsight I think lends itself to creativity. We had a small punk scene in our area, and even though my high school was a public high school, a lot of kids, when I was there, just so happened to be really creative and interested in music. And the New Jersey punk and DIY scene was where I got my first experiences playing shows, and I got to meet other artists there. It was a community, even though it was admittedly a very homogenous one, but it was something that inspired me. I got to hear other people's work, and I felt like I belonged. Living in suburbia, I think, sparks this feeling of always wanting to feel something and always wanting more. I mean, even physically, you are physically near a bigger city. Like, you're constantly longing for more. And I think that longing comes across in my music. Even today, when I'm living in New York City, a lot of my earlier work with my old band talked about kind of typical American kid growing pains and coming of age. I think also from time to time struggling with mental health, which is an almost universal experience. I don't want to glamorize it and say that it's necessary for making art, because I actually hate that trope that, you have to be like a disturbed person to be a good artist and that you have to suffer. But I would say that for me, writing and being able to put my feelings that seem so insurmountable into a song has been really therapeutic. Aside from themes of longing for more, my very unremarkable and generally pretty pleasant upbringing has inspired me to try to find poetry in very mundane things. So motif-wise, I'm really inspired by nature and water. I love the ocean, which is just part of living on the East Coast, I think. I think I've used ocean metaphors too much in my writing to the point where I'm now forcing myself not to. As a kid, I was kind of a perfectionist and a people pleaser, and I held myself to these really high standards, and I didn't really take many risks. So I feel like the effect in my writing is twofold. One, a lot of my lyrics are very self-deprecating, but to me, it's almost in like a sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek way where I'm kind of, kicking myself out by showing how ridiculous it is in a song. Other people might not see it that way, but that's how I see it. And also, I feel like I'm sort of rebelling now a little bit in my songwriting. I've been exploring themes of religion and guilt and morality and, kind of self-determination as well. I feel like I write a lot about darker themes because they just have a lot of gravity. And other artists, have written about darker themes in ways that I've been like, wow, I can relate to that. Like, that's so relieving that I'm not the only person feeling this way. And so I think it's almost a way of taking power away from things. If something is really upsetting you or bothering you, you can make a piece of art out of it, and all of a sudden it's wrapped up in this nice little box, and it's something you're proud of. Something that you were ashamed of is now something you're proud of, and that's what I've been trying to work through most recently in my writing. One of my biggest influences is a singer-songwriter from Long Island named Laura Stevenson. She was the first person whose music I heard and was specifically like, I am going to try to make music like this. Her lyrics and sound are just really unique, and she's just a very skilled musician. I've also been really influenced lately by the women of Boy Genius, so Phoebe Bridgers, Lucy Dacus, and Julian Baker. I think it's really cool how indie rock and folk-influenced singer-songwriters are getting a lot of attention right now, and I'm definitely listening to all three of them and the band on repeat. Other bands and artists I love are too many to name, but there's Big Thief and Adrienne Lenker, the frontwoman of that band, Hop Along, Samia, Saint Seneca, Bon Iver. I've also been studying up on Elliott Smith, which I think is required listening for songwriters. And they all of these artists do what I want to do lyrically. They mix dark and light. They come up with curious ways of conveying feelings, and like they also just create really catchy, really satisfying songs. Right now, I'm working on recording my first solo EP. And while I'm doing that, I'm also trying to book some shows around New York City and the surrounding area. And I'm also working on writing more songs and trying to experiment with different lyrical ideas, different chord progressions, and stuff like that. Question 6. I would say there are two biggest challenges to being an artist. One's pure logistics, and the other is my own self-doubt. Logistically, it can be hard to find the time and money to make art in a way that's fruitful, especially if you have other jobs, which I do right now. And then after I come home from work, I'm often up late writing or recording, and it's definitely slow going. I always compare myself to other people and pick myself apart as well. Imposter syndrome is real. Sometimes I genuinely feel like I'm faking it and I feel like a big clown. It's good to aspire to be better and to take constructive criticism, even if it's from yourself, but sometimes self-criticism can be debilitating. Advice I would give my younger self would be to just go for it. Do your best and constantly challenge yourself and learn more. And don't sell yourself short. Not everything you make is going to be a masterpiece, but writing is an exercise in and of itself, and it's going to make you better. And also validation from other people is nice, but also be honest with yourself about your own goals and strengths and weaknesses outside of their influence. I haven't really tried any unconventional mediums, but there's stuff that you can experiment with in the recording process, which has been fun. My boyfriend, Caleb Matheson, is a producer, an audio engineer, and a drummer who has a studio in Queens. So I get to work with him, and we get to experiment in the studio together. So I've sung into an old cell phone rewired to be a microphone. We put a microphone inside of a paper cup in the middle of the room, and that's how we got that really cool muffled lo-fi sound that can be heard on my single Atlantic. I usually need complete silence if I'm writing prose or lyrics. My brain is loud enough on its own. Sometimes I even drive in silence and I forget that I'm actually in silence. So definitely need quiet to focus. When people tell me that they can relate to my lyrics, that's my goal, because that's what my favorite artists do for me. They make a lot of feelings that might seem isolating seem relatable. And that feeling when an artist perfectly, but like really poetically verbalizes a feeling you've struggled to explain is just the best. So whenever someone says a song I wrote did that for them, I get really excited.
If I never get out of bed, will my bed grow into me? Will I become part of the fibers like junk grown into a tree? And if junk becomes part of a tree trunk, does that render the tree junk too?